Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of Sit Down. I'm DJ Sixsmith. We're talking poetry today. Iain S. Thomas is here. How are you, sir?
How's it going?
Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
So, you got your new book, Every Word You Cannot Say.
Yeah.
First of all, congratulations on it. We were talking
Thank
before,
you.
9 or 10 books now. I mean,
Yeah.
you've made a whole life out of this. So,
Yeah.
why don't we wind it back first? Take me back to growing up as a kid and how you get this bug to start writing and getting into poetry.
I think I always wrote. It wasn't something that I ever decided I wanted to do. I also just assumed everyone around me was a writer. And then one day I discovered that I was the only one keeping as many journals as I was.
Interesting. And how old were you at this point?
Like 14, 15,
Oh, wow.
you know. So it was just something I always did. And I grew up in like a very left-brained academic household, and being a creative professional or an artist for a living wasn't something that was seen as a viable career path.
Right.
So I ended up in advertising because I knew I was creative and it seemed like a safe way to make money. And at some point, I really wanted to do something that wasn't advertising, that I had more control over. And so I just started posting poetry online next to these photographs a friend of mine would send me. He lived in Japan. We'd met on the internet. We still haven't ever met.
Oh, wow.
And so since 2007, we've been doing that, and we made this project called I Wrote This For You. And for me, it was always about the person reading the work. And so I never mentioned gender, age, race, location. And every day I would just write a poem or some prose about it. And it eventually became really big. And in 2011, it became a best-selling collection of poetry. It became a book. And yeah, I mean, it afforded me the chance to kind of just focus on writing full-time. And it's been incredible. And so this is my first major poetry collection since that book.
That's awesome.
I've written like a science fiction book and some short stories and things like that, but this is the first really big collection since then.
Well, I think it's really interesting that somebody you've never met helped you to make this all possible. Like, that is the world that we live in today.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the miracle of the internet, I guess. Yeah, we hung out in some of the same forums, we enjoyed the same music, and we were just friends. And so I had this idea for a blog, and I said to him, this is what I want to do, can I use this photograph you've just taken? And he said, yes. And then I asked the day after that, and the day after that, and so we just carried on. And so we've been friends, like, since then.
It's almost like if you guys do meet, it takes away from this whole long-term internet relationship.
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite a letdown when we do eventually.
It's like, oh, so you're the guy.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So poetry has obviously been something very personal too. Who were some poets growing up that you really admired?
Well, I don't know if I really liked poets specifically. I mean, I thought Dylan Thomas was quite good, not just because we share the same surname. T.S. Eliot, E.E. Cummings, but I mean, I was always kind of fascinated by what I would call the everyday poetry out there. Like, if you look at the poster for the movie Alien, and it says, "In space, no one can hear you scream." Like, that might not seem like poetry,
but it is.
But it contains the entire world of that movie in one sentence, And so there's this kind of everyday poetry all around us, in film and in comic books and in, advertising and just because it isn't put into a book of poetry and people say this is poetry, there's still that kind of stuff out there, and I still find that inspiring. I often say, like, the biggest job of a poet is to just listen to the world around you and to listen to your own inner monologue, because there's things everywhere that could be poems, and your job is just to listen out for them and then write them down as fast as possible.
And I think it's interesting also because the jump from advertising to poetry, people may be surprised at that at first, but what you just said, like, advertising, there is poetry there. So I'm sure it was natural for you. It must have been tough at first because you're coming from this macro perspective, big-time projects, big-time campaigns, but at the same time, simple messages, simple poems. So what was that transition like?
I think, for me, it was actually a way to control what I was doing, which in advertising you don't really have that much of in terms of control. You do work with a very large team of people, and you work for a client, and as much as I had a very successful career in advertising, I won lots of awards, I worked all over the world, and it was great. But the way it started for me in terms of that transition was I started looking for a way to do something that I could control completely. and also as a reaction to the ad industry itself, because the ad industry is a very egotistical space.
Oh yeah.
It's all about like, what award have you won? Which big campaign did you work on? And
how much money are you
how
making?
much money are you making? Where are you working? And so when I started I Wrote This For You, the first major poetry collection, it was a reaction to that. It was like, it's not going to be about me. It's going to be about the person reading. And so that was that. And yeah. And then at some point, I started writing something that didn't really fit into that format of I Wrote This For You, and it became this book.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we were talking off camera just about the impact of poetry on everybody, and sometimes it can kind of get put in a box that it's for, college institutions and elitists, but you find it's most important just for everybody. So how can you give people access to it in a way that is not too big for people to comprehend? It's just very easy to talk about. How can you go about that?
I think fundamentally right now, the world needs poetry. Like if I look around the world, like no matter where you are in it, whether you're here or in Britain or in Brazil or New Zealand, it doesn't matter. Like the world needs compassion, it needs kindness, and it needs empathy, and it needs love, and it needs poetry. And poetry is all of those things. And I think accessible poetry is poetry that you can understand, that has some mystery to it still. And I don't think it's really about me making it accessible. It's about, it is just what it is, and people will be naturally attracted to it. And they'll find meaning in it, and they'll tell their friends and go, this has inspired me and this has moved me.
Yeah, perfectly said. And it just applies for every season of your life too. And you've said it before, you were struggling with depression at one point and really in a dark place. And this book, this poetry helped you to get back out of that. So just take me back, what was going on at that point, and then how did you use poetry to fuel you through the tough time?
Well, I think back in 2013, I was depressed, and I wasn't depressed for any particular reason. I was just depressed, I think, and depression can be like that. And I felt like my depression was part of who I was, that it defined me. I felt like it was what made my writing interesting, which is a very scary story that creative people can tell themselves. And one day I went out for a drive, and I stopped on the side of the road, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life at that point. And I took out a pen and some paper, and I just started writing. And when I looked down, I had written some of the first few poems in this book. And it was this really kind voice in my head that I think was always there, but I hadn't really been listening to at that point. And I think everyone has a really kind voice in their head that they ignore a lot of the time. And so for me, this book is about illustrating that conversation inside of you. Because everyone has a conversation in their head. There's one voice that says, you're good enough, and there's another one that says you're not good enough.
Right, the angel and the devil there on the shoulder.
Exactly. And so for me, this book is about writing down that conversation so you can see it and be aware of it. And if you can be aware of it, then you can have a little bit more control over it. And I think it's also about just connecting with other people and making you feel known and recognizing yourself in others. Because if you read the book and you go, if this is true for me, it's probably true for someone else.
Totally, yeah. And you mentioned journaling. I mean, it's such a therapeutic thing. Like I just started journaling probably within the last year. Yeah. And sometimes you don't even know how to say things, or you don't even realize that you're thinking these things.
Exactly.
And you start writing, and it's it's really fascinating to see what pours out onto the page. And especially as an author and a poet, like you're driving in the car. You had no idea that you would get to that point. I mean, that's really interesting.
But I think if there's one thing I could say to people, it's that writers aren't magical creatures that we're the only one with licenses to write.
Everybody can do it.
Everybody can do it, and that's a large part of what I try to tell people. I'm not some magical, mystical creature, with wisdom from on high or whatever. I'm just someone who sat down one day and started to write, and writing. If you sit down and you write, you will discover that there is a kind voice in your head, and you will discover, a lot of things about yourself as you're writing. And I mean, I encourage everyone to do it.
Totally.
Don't just read, write.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really funny because you mentioned how you want your poetry to be for everybody, and then people in Hollywood have really gravitated to your work. Spielberg's quoting you, like that must be pretty wild for you to see your words traveling around the world.
It is pretty wild. Sam Smith posted a picture on Instagram a while back, and I could see a copy of my book in the background. Steven Spielberg quoted me at a dinner with Oprah Winfrey and Tom Hanks a little while ago. Camila Cabello spoke about it on Twitter. Ariana Huffington uses one of my poems in her commencement speeches. She used it in one of her books. And yeah, it's amazing because I mean I live on the tip of Africa.
Right, and these are all different types of people. Spielberg, older, Sam Jackson, his experience, Camila Cabello's in her 20s. Like exactly. You're hitting everybody, and you're just this dude writing family, kids, and
no one knows who I am back home.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just
even though you're an international bestseller, like that's wild.
No one knows who I am.
But I'm sure you like that. You can just keep to yourself and do your thing.
Author famous is the best kind of famous because like people kind of know your name, but they don't recognize you on the street.
Exactly, you can just walk through and be like, nope, not me.
Yeah, exactly.
So when people do read the book, check it out, what do you want them to walk away thinking?
I want them to go and have the conversations that they think they can't have, which is in the name. It's called Every Word You Cannot Say. And I want them to be able to say kind things to themselves, and I want them to call the people they think that they can't call, and go and visit the people they haven't visited in a long time. And because I think that's what the world needs right now. And I think it needs people to feel less lonely. I think it needs people to feel more connected. And I think the world needs poetry. I've often said like poetry is the thing we invented to be able to say the things that we cannot say. And
Amen to that. Iain, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Every Word You Cannot Say, wherever books are sold, get it now. We'll see you next time here on The Sit Down.